On day 4 of COP29, finance, investment and trade in climate solutions took centre stage. Discussions focused on mobilising the massive financial resources needed to help developing countries transition to green energy. Meeting halls at the COP venue were busy. Officials, representatives and business people shuttled through the rooms with talks mainly revolving around funding climate action. The main target is to set new financial goals.
The meeting we were just at was launching the Big Fit initiative, which is on climate finance, investment and trade, to see how these three issues could work together towards a better green transition. And I made the point that as part of that, we really need to invest in people, because a lot of the finance that's currently being directed at climate issues invests in hardware, in infrastructure and in technology.
Experts stress that developing countries, excluding China, need at least $1 trillion every year by 2030 to support a green energy transition. The outcome will be judged largely by whether rich nations, development banks and the private sector commit to annual funding goals.
One of a very interesting meeting to see how the Sovereign Wealth Fund can contribute to the energy transition. We heard from a very interesting speaker about the challenges, but also the opportunities that are open to investor and to institutional investor to contribute to this very interesting investment field.
The previous funding goal was $100 billion annually, which expires in 2025. While the goal was met in 2022, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development said that much of this was in loans rather than grants, a point that many developing nations are now urging to change.
It is not the words that actually allow countries or regions to deal with climate change. It is actually finance actions that are needed. And here I'm particularly excited because we just came out of the Multilateral Development Bank's President's Group, in which we were pleased to announce that the Multilateral Development Banks have already, by 2020, we will have $170 billion annually committed to climate finance. $120 billion of that will be for low-income and middle-income countries, and $50 billion of that will be for high-income countries, largely on mitigation.
A recently released report by the independent high-level expert group on climate finance suggested that by 2035, the annual funding target might need to increase to $1.3 trillion, or even higher if countries delay their commitments.
The main objective, of course, is to discuss how we can, as a sovereign wealth funds, finance energy transition. And during my intervention and speech, I've shared our expertise, both as a country and as an organization, in how we finance energy transitions. The most important message, of course, during the discussion was that this energy transition has to be done in a balanced way.
Behind closed doors, negotiators are working on draft agreements, but so far, preliminary documents from the United Nations climate body reveal a broad range of opinions among nations. It's still unclear what the final agreement will look like, but all eyes remain on these negotiations. Around 50 people protested at the entrance of the COP29 climate change venue, urging wealthy nations to uphold their financial commitments. Under the slogan, Pay Up, protesters displayed a 10-metre-long banner saying detailed climate invoice. They're calling for governments to put their hands in their pockets and provide enough funds to help poorer countries deal with the devastating impact of climate change.
At the moment, the governments led by the richest countries of the world are refusing to talk about quantum sums or amounts of money that needs to be delivered. They're refusing to talk about public funds commitments. They're pointing to the private sector. They're evading their responsibility. And it is part of the agreement in the Climate Convention that developed countries should be delivering climate finance for the global south or for developing countries.
Activists insist that solutions to the climate crisis must involve the global south, indigenous communities and frontline defenders. Though they contribute little to emissions, these groups are heavily affected by adverse weather conditions. The European Union says that countries remain far from reaching an agreement on a collective target for financing climate change mitigation efforts. That's according to the EU's negotiator, Jacob Worksman, at the COP29 Climate Summit. He says a new draft text for the new collective quantified goal is still too lengthy.
We are very worried because there were literally more than a year of preparation in producing the text that was quite long, that came into the negotiations through the work of the co-facilitators at the outset of last week. And that work was rejected as a basis of negotiations, unfortunately, when the work actually started under the NCQG contact groups. We know that the co-facilitators have now been given a mandate to produce a new text. That was tabled today, and we understand that that has been accepted as a basis of negotiations, so there's a potential now to work forward. But it's still over 30 pages long. I've seen some versions of the outcome on the NCQG that have been no more than 1.5 or 2 pages in order to capture everything that we need to send the signals that are necessary under the new collective quantified goal. So clearly we are way off a landing ground if you look at the texts on their own. It's been my experience that as long as there is a little bit more time to negotiate on something that's that complicated, we'll take it. So I don't think that we will completely close every issue this week, but I think that we will have developed a momentum that will ensure that we wrap it up certainly in the early part of next week.
In a statement to journalists at COP29 in Baku, Lazar Comenescu, Secretary-General of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, expressed thanks for the opportunity to discuss the organization's efforts in tackling environmental and climate challenges in the Black Sea region. Mr. Comenescu noted that the chairmanship of the organization will be transferred to Azerbaijan from January 1st, 2025. He said that he is optimistic that the challenges will be met head-on.
I'm glad that I had the opportunity to elaborate a little bit about what our organization, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, has been doing in this. And I want to stress here again that in this context as well, that we have a special working group dedicated to renovating the good governance, renewal of good governance. And this working group is, you may wish to know, has been for the last more than a couple of years under the country coordinator, the Republic of Azerbaijan. And I am glad that it will continue to be so. And much more, even more important, I'm pretty sure that we will make, as an organization, new steps ahead. All the more so that next year in the first half, as you may wish to know, Azerbaijan is to have the chairmanship in office of the Black Sea Economic Organization. I am looking forward to work closely in this area as well.
Let's now move to Serbia with Ms. Komorska. With Serbia
At the COP29 panel on critical energy transition minerals, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urged the rich nations to pay fairly for transitional resources from poorer countries.
For developing countries rich in those resources, there is a huge opportunity to generate prosperity, to eliminate poverty, and to drive sustainable development. But too often, this is not the case. Too often we see the mistakes of the past repeated in a stampede of greed, that crushes the poor.
Guterres called for global support to implement the recommendations, including establishing a group to address fair trade and benefit sharing. He emphasized that a just energy transition depends on empowering the developing countries that produce the necessary raw materials, ensuring that rewards are shared equitably.
As demand for critical energy transition minerals surge, so must action. Together, let us turn the transition towards justice and equity.
The UN Secretary-General warned that the green energy transition mustn't repeat the injustices of the past, where developing nations were exploited.